Welcome to Legacy Conversations, a channel where we preserve military memories and history.
Hello everyone, I'm excited and I have reason to be. I've got a colonel here from a Signal Corps. And I can tell you the Signal Corps is damn close to my heart. As I said to the colonel just before we started, my late dad was actually in the Signal Corps. 1954. Yeah, he was called up, I think, for 3 months or 9 months or something, Lutteling. And he ended up in the Signal Corps and he was complaining till the day he died in 1994 about carrying these heavy truck batteries around, which apparently was quite heavy. I tried to explain to him that our radios also had a lot of batteries, but he wasn't that impressed. He was impressed with the word nickel cadmium or something like that. That impressed him. But I'm sure that Colonel will in the future tell us more on a technical level. Colonel Diederik Reinecke, thank you, sir. I'm really grateful for you. Thank you for your time. You've had a fantastic career, a very different career than most officers, I would say, actually. Because I know you served in the Rhodesian Army as well and the South African one, and then you just went through the ranks. And you know a lot about signals and signaling, and guys, that to me is extremely important because I always took for granted if I got on the radio, doesn't matter what it was, I was hoping and actually expecting somebody to call me on the other side or to at least relay. And that was really like a lifeline. You needed the chopper boys, you needed the Air Force, you needed mortar support, you need the Army from a police counterinsurgency viewpoint. We didn't like admitting that, but sometimes we really did. We knew we could get on the radios and we could then just call up. But it was a lot more technical than the normal things. And a lot of things were happening in the background, which the Colonel will explain to us, if not now, then in future episodes. Sir, you're welcome. I ask you, how did you end up in the Army? What happened to you? Can you give us just a brief background about yourself, and then we'll talk about you as a young officer conducting operations in the old Rhodesia.
I was born in Forest Smith in the Free State, and then 1971 I was called up and I reported to 1st Signal Regiment in Pretoria, Voetlakerhoogte. Then I decided there, going to the School of Signals as a junior leader, that I want to join the Army, and I indicated that, and we were sent to the Army Gymnasium in Heidelberg for the selection board, and I was then selected as a candidate officer, and I went on to do my basic training in Oudtshoorn as an infantry soldier at the School of Infantry, and then we were sent on the formative course in Saldanha, and after that we returned back to this infantry school doing platoon weapons, platoon commander, and what we called unconventional warfare course there. That was the first year of my Army training, and then the second year was dedicated to signals training at a School of Signals that was still in Pretoria at that stage. I got commissioned in 1973, reporting to DHQ Signal Squadron that was next to the DB, where I became immediately the transport officer, trying to fix all the vehicles. And during that period, I was also trained in electronic warfare because they were responsible for that. I went to a base in Petersburg. That was a training environment for electronic warfare. And after that, I was also trained in Morse code. And in 1974, I was seconded to the Rhodesian military to go to a place called Chirundu that is very near Kariba Dam, to the bottom of the Kariba Dam. and there I was a second lieutenant, but due to the to the appointment, I became immediately a lieutenant for messing purposes. And that is how I ended up in the Rhodesian Air Force, Rhodesian military, the Signal Corps there, and I was the commander as a lieutenant of a Victor troop, which was an electronic warfare section deployed at Chirundu.
And can you tell me this in totally different, the Rhodesian Army versus the South African one? Because one is peacetime and the other one is a bit more war footing.
I would say when I arrived there, it was like the intake of a normal military base. You get your uniforms, you get your sleeping accommodation. So I was sleeping in the beginning in Salisbury at the KG6, the King George VI barracks, and then I was transferred to Victor Troop to take up my responsibility there. So it was the same. It's discipline, it's saluting, it's getting briefed and everything. So it was quite, because of the previous training, it was like seamlessly. And so I reported at Chirundu as the new troop commander there. We were situated on a little hill there, overlooking the Zambezi River, which was very nice to see. Next to our base was a SAP base, because the SAP was deployed there to cover the Zambezi Valley. That's particular company that was deployed there. But we were not really interacting with them. They were not there to protect us or anything like that, but they were our neighbors. We actually had very little contact with them at that stage. Now, the troop was about 37 people, and it was signal personnel, a national serviceman that was deployed there in the base for a period of a year, and their job was to do interception and other electronic warfare tasks. I can just tell a little bit about that. We've got different sections in the electronic warfare troop. People that listen to all the radios together with a receiver, a very powerful receiver, plus a tape recorder, and the signalman was sitting behind it, and every transmitter on the other side in Zambia was recorded. The moment they started speaking, the things were written down as well, and then later checked on the tape recorder itself. And that was the one part. It was the fixed task component of the electronic warfare troop. Then we also had a search task group. That was signalmen that was searching for new frequencies. The whole day and the whole night, they were sitting there with their receivers, and their job was to search for new frequencies, specifically looking for terrorist type of, that we called that time, type of frequencies and so on. A very difficult task, because people doing that type of work was very secretive on their radio communications. It was not like the army of the Zambian army or the Zambian police. And then we also had the direction finding section as well. Now, the direction finding section was responsible as soon as somebody transmit from the Zambian side, then the direction finding plotted that one, and together with our other station that was situated at Binga, we got a cross reference, and then we could determine where that transmitting took place from. In other words, if we transmit, then we talk to Binga, we give the frequency, they plot the same radio call, and then we determine where they are. And I must say, the fixed task people were so good, and they know their operators on the other side. If that person was transferred to another station, say from Nadola, transferred to Kapwe, and he start transmitting from that side, the signaler will immediately recognize the voice and say, well, this guy is not there anymore. And the young signalmen were maybe not the most disciplined looking guys with drill and all those things. They really know their job. And every transmitting that was done were written down, even in Morse code, although they used normally the English one, because it was an English based station. And we also had an intelligence officer interpreting the messages that was received. So we had a supervisor receiving the messages as it is coming off from the operators. They scrutinize the message, see if it is a high priority message or something like that attract attention. Give it to the intelligence officer, which was normally a major working there with us, and he decided then, and if it was like priority, we transmitted it back to the Army HQ for follow-up. Otherwise, the normal run-of-the-mill messages, we put in a courier bag, and on a weekly basis, we took it through to Salisbury. That was the operational side of the electronic warfare troop. So I had a fix, the superintendent reporting to me. I also had a sergeant major that looks after the discipline and the general running of the camp, and then the intelligence officer together with me as the command group. And then there's the logistical side and the administrative side that I will talk about just now. Our power supply was two generators that ran on a 24-hour basis. In other words, one generator ran, and then when it switched over to another one, and we had people that looked after that, like we call Sparkies. That was the nickname. I remember one guy whose name was Barufa, and when the generator goes like woo, then the whole camp shouted Barufa, and then he runs and go and check the generator. Then we also had the kitchen area and the whole mess area, which was providing us with food, which we get on a weekly basis. And I must say that we had good food, although it was a national serviceman as the chef, but they know their work. And we also had some recreation area and a volleyball field, so the people not on shift, because we were running a 24-hour operation. Then we played volleyball and those type of things to keep the troops occupied. Other interesting thing was every morning and every evening we had stand to. We had bunkers around the base itself, and first light, then everybody gets up and go and stand to on a signal, and then evening stand to again before the night shift started. We in the night we spent some time on search to search for frequencies as well. We used prediction charts of the right frequencies that will operate, because it was we mostly worked on high frequency HF, because the range of HF is very it's a long distance, while the VHF was only short distance, to say maximum 10 kilometers and so on. So we were concentrating on high frequency type of things. Interesting on the operational side is that the Zambian army at that stage used Slidex. It was an old British method, but our people were so good at the stage that they broke that Slidex as they were transmitting. That was interesting to see. I once had a sergeant major visiting us, and he was listening to the radio, and while the person was doing the Slidex, he was deciphering it immediately. But they also had different codes that was copied and then sent to the Army HQ to decipher, which was a more complicated one. We also had a what we called a backshackle. That was the communication to Army HQ that used cryptography to send secret messages and so on, because our system was quite developed for that. So that was also a section. The Sergeant Major was responsible. He was a qualified cryptographer, putting it in code and deciphering the code. What the recreation of the personnel was, except for the volleyball, we've had a weekly run to Salisbury and receive films and so on. At the SAP, there was a screen and a projector, and we provide the films because it was allocated to us, and then we watched the movies. Otherwise, the volleyball and keeping the base clean and so on. And then once in a while, we send the people on recreation, like they call R&R, to Kariba Dam. That was for 2 or 3 days. And what happened normally there, except for just relaxing and so on, they also go on the houseboats on the Kariba Dam. And that was quite interesting. Myself were one time there, and we had a briefing on the dam wall itself and seeing all the generators and how they conducted. And what was interesting about that dam was that on the other side, in the Zambian side, all the bulldozers and things that were used in the construction of the dam were standing there, rusting away, because it was too expensive to relocate them when they finished the dam wall. But it is quite a sight to see that sluices open and that water coming out of that dam. And also the houseboat experience of seeing the elephants just very near to you, but an elephant cannot reach you. And the other thing, driving on those roads in the Zambezi Valley, I mean, it was wildlife. It is not like a game park. It was like wild Africa. We've seen elephants crossing the road, rhinos, lions, even from the camp. We saw lions there and people walking there. It's not like it was wild. It was not controlled by a gate or anything like that. I must say that the time in the Zambezi, I've stayed there for the Zambezi Valley for a year, and that was quite an experience to live in the Zambezi Valley. It was dangerous in the sense that it was a crossing area for people coming from Zambia into Rhodesia. But we never encountered any problems in that sense. Only one day a Zambian helicopter flew over the camp, hovered there to check what we are doing. But before we were ready and we were taking our rifles, trying to shoot it down, because we immediately recognized the insignia and so on. But he was too fast because he was just over the border. So they had the look of what we are doing. Otherwise, interesting thing was the bridge was, the Chirundu bridge was closed. There was no traffic going over the bridge because of the political situation. But we weren't involved in that. The other thing that we also had to do was to go to the airfield, airplanes coming in, small aircraft, and then we had to run up and down and clean for mines and so on with a Bedford. Our Bedford's name was Susie, that with sandbags and conveyor belts on it for the landmines and so on. But it was, the landing strip was at the sugar estates. Now the sugar estates weren't operating anymore, but as you enter the sugar estates, there was a little church. I think it was a Roman Catholic church, but it was shot to pieces. I always, till today, I always remember that thing that when you drive on the airstrip, then the little church was there on the right-hand side, shot to pieces, and only the ruins were standing there. And the sugar was growing everywhere wild, and it was actually a pity to see that beautiful sugar estates in such a situation. But that was the times that we lived in. That is basically the overview of my time there. A year that I will always remember, to the operational work and the command and control work as a young officer without supervision. You were in charge, and that was quite nice. It was the same time that Colonel Gaddafi became the president of his country. I remember it was an article published in the Rhodesian Herald on that, and I had a cutting that I put on the wall there. And when he was disposed later on in life, I always thought back to that time that he was in charge there and I was in charge in Victor True. I once went to Binga. That was a very interesting, it's basically the same work that we did. But Binga, there was also a warm water type of channel. And then for recreation, then you went down the chute of this warm water. And that was quite nice to go down, just like a slide these days with with a normal holiday resort, all those slides. But this one was a very crude one, but it was fun and games to go down that one. So in retrospect, I think that that was a very good experience for me to understand radio security, because I was listening to the enemy, and since that time I was not transmitting too long on a radio, because the less you transmit, the less they can fix you and find you and so on. But it's more sophisticated electronic warfare today than at that time. But we had very good equipment, and we did our job. We collected the signal intelligence information, and we distributed it to all the parties that were interested in that. And in that sense, I learned a lot for my career later on. And then The other thing is the command and control of having 37 troops under your command, looking after everything, their transport, their meals, their recreation, their discipline. It helped a lot for laying a foundation for my career, and to take responsibility and stay within the norms of what is expected from you. So in all, that was a very good experience as a young officer. I think I was like 22 years old or something like that. That's my story.
Well, welcome here. You know, guys, we've been doing this for almost 5 years and we have millions of views and more than 1 million hours of views. And we're really hurting our enemies because they don't like our message to come out, which is why we're so suppressed. So just a quick reminder, if you like the video, please think about it. Buy me a rooibos tea. But you actually click on it as buy me a coffee. It is quite standard right across YouTube and everywhere else.
We just added it. It's a new
support,
a new method of support, which
Yeah.
is greatly appreciated.
Yes, and it is still the same as you still have Patreon, of course, and we will still ask you to read my books and the books we wrote together because it's really, really good. This is Rebecca, by the way, if you don't know, it's my lovely wife. She's the driving force behind Legacy because there were times when I wanted to give up and there were lots of frustrations, especially with her.
Even in filling out the Buy Me a Coffee form.
Man, that's true. I've got a South African attitude against red tape. You know, you were standing in the queues where television things, you do get angry quite quickly. I think I won't get it out of me. But guys, to be honest, it's not only me making these videos. Sometimes Fossey and the rest would also contribute. And if they don't contribute in making the video, Fossey especially is doing a lot of editing in the background. So we're going to put in also a specific link where another presenter was involved, where you buy him or her a coffee, and not me, because I think it's just the right thing to do.
We're starting out the test phase
Yeah.
now.
See if it works.
So you can buy us a coffee. There is a choice. You can select 1, 2, 3, or more coffees.
Yeah.
It's not coffee.
Or
We don't
rooibos tea.
see. We don't drink coffee. That's why, believe it or not, that's why rooibos tea is very appreciated.
Yeah, very much so, very much so. And then, yeah, of course, you know, I say this in the thank you message as well, but it is a bit psychological as well. If you keep on doing this and keep on working, keep on spending a lot of money to do it, the trip to us in South Africa to record all the Air Force things has cost 100,000 rand easily. At some stage, you really feel abused, man. You really feel that you need to get something back, even if it's small. It's more about psychological, doing a good job.
And what I see is it motivates him to continue on and get new ideas. And he would like the trip, which is coming up, I think, or might, who knows when you see this, bridge over River Kwai. He was so motivated to do that.
Yeah, and we learned a lot, you know, River Kwai. It's a fantastic video. Also include Hellfire Pass, but we also would like to go to Vietnam and look at Khe Sanh and Dien Bien Phu and where the Americans ran away. The CIA headquarters left their files behind. I'll mention that. But even here in Thailand, in Bangkok, if we go to Bangkok, we fly to Bangkok, we can spend a day or two and record the Air Force Museum or the other museums that are there. You know, it's history, man. We need support to do it. It's not fair that we carry the burden all by ourselves. I'm not really willing to do that anymore. People can enjoy the videos. If you can assist us, buy us a coffee, man. What does coffee cost? Or a rooibos tea? Nothing. Just contribute something and we can keep us going and hurt our enemies even more.
Perfect.
Okay. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Looking very American right now.
You do?
Yeah, because American girls always wear hats because their hair always looks bad. Like, you don't have to worry about your hair.
Okay. Well, what a wonderful life. You know, sir, I have a few questions if you don't mind. I just want to say, I had the honor and privilege meet some of your signalers. I think of Justin Taylor. He was with 3-2 Battalion as well in that huge firefight they had that day, which we're still talking about to this very day. Then, of course, Marius Skipper, who is a colleague, fellow attorney. And what impressed me about these two men is they're physically very big, powerful people. They are strong. You can see they're not wankers. Now, in the police, we had a different method. When we arrive in a base, we would take the fattest constable, one black and one white, and make them the chefs. I mean, logically speaking, you should be able to make food if you can eat. And then we would take the second fattest and we make them radio operators. But it seems to me that the army was a bit more sophisticated in this, in that you dedicatedly actually train these people up. So may I ask you, what does it take? What is the mindset of a radio operator in the South African Army? We know it's a very general question. Must he be able to speak languages? Must he be physically strong to carry a radio? Is he a technical type of guy? Puntenierig, as we would say in Afrikaans. What are you looking for a good signaler?
You get your infantry signaler that's allocated to a platoon and so on, but that is not provided by the South African Corps of Signals. We provide like EW operators. They were fluent in, say for instance, Portuguese and English. So we selected them for that. We had Colonel Murphy that time when he was the OC of the Army Gymnasium, developed what they call battery tests. And it's like an aptitude test. And we had done that with the intake, or he initiated that. And then we selected the people on that ground. In other words, there were certain characteristics for an EW operator. There was characteristics that we were looking for, like in people working with power supply and with battery charging and things like that. And then there was the telecommunication operator working with telexes, because we had a very sophisticated telex system. We even trained people in working teleprinters. A now, B now, C now, and then also radio operators. So there was technical people, electronic warfare people, and then your normal telecommunications operators that were tested through this battery tests that indicate where will they be mostly suited. And then for the officers and the NCOs, we also had tests like that this guy will be better in planning, and this one will be better in drill and musketry, and so on. So we've placed in the Corps of Signals a lot of emphasis on the selection of people during the end of basic training. And then the people are divided after basic training in the subject that they are best suited. EW operators were transferred to 5 Signal Regiment. The TELS operators, command and control equipment, were transferred to 2 Signal Regiment, and the radio operators were trained in Heidelberg. Together with the NCOs and together with the officer, the potential candidate officers. The cycle worked like this. For say, for instance, lieutenant, when you, like Marius, he did basic training, then he did JL training, and then he did TELS operator training, and then he did CO training. At the end of the CO training, there was a selection board, and they were posted all over South Africa and also the operational area. And I remember still the time that he was selected to go to 3-2 Battalion, not knowing where he's going. And that was very interesting later on when we sort of joked over that. So it was like the Army Gymnasium was like a machine producing signalers for the different categories. But the 1,200 troops or whatever the number was after basic training divided into subject training, if you can call it like that.
Yeah, this is amazing because I think Marius ended up spending 13 maanden in Angola without a break before he went home again. And he wrote a good book, 2 good books actually about it. So did Justin, Whisper in the Reeds. Really good books. I've got copies of all of them. But you yourself, sir, you're also involved in a book about the Signal Corps. Can you tell us about that book?
Yeah, what happened is that, well, now in my later years, then I thought about what happened, reflecting on your career. And then you see all the books that is written about the operational things that took place. In other words, all the different 3-2 Battalion and all the other ones. And then I realized that there's nothing written about the core schools. In other words, the people doing the initial training and getting the people ready for the operational area and for the command structure of the army with the different provinces and so on. And I then talked to Arnold Tron. Arnold Tron is a person that his father was the regimental sergeant major of the Army Gymnasium, and Arnold itself was at Katima, and we got together, and he had the same viewpoint as myself, and then we decided to put this history book together. And we started with the project. It took us about a year to put a book together. And the way it was like we've decided to give a bit of the organizational structure, a bit of the training itself, but then mainly the recollections of people working there. And that included national servicemen, it included citizen force people. We've collected those, like in Afrikaans, staaltjies, what happened to them there, and they send us it through to our email, and we worked it, and together with Colonel van Staden, he was our technical advisor, so we've put this book together, about 400 pages with photos and all these aspects that happened. And now we've already sold more than 100 books to previous people that were there. And on the 1st of May, with the military thing at the Voetlike Monument, Colonel Bobby Keller will sell our books as well there, so that at his stalls, because he was also very involved. He was an operational officer, and they were then transferred to the Army Gymnasium, and he had a big input in bringing the operational area and the training together so that we train better in preparation for posting out people to the operational area. So he's selling the books for us on the 1st of May at the Voetlike Monument at the military fair.
Yeah, would it be possible, the problem we have here is this video will probably come out only of August, which is many months after the 1st of May, because we're so far ahead. Is there somebody we can contact in case we want this book?
We've got an email. The email is leergims, LEERGIMS @gmail.com. And then we will send the the price list and so on, and you can order through that.
Okay, no, that's wonderful news. I'm really grateful for that. I did ask the Colonel that we do make an episode on the book itself in the future. I didn't know about it until now, so we would really want to go into that. It's very important, guys. You have to leave a memory behind. You can't just depart to a better place and we don't know what you did. It's very important. Come and speak to me or speak to one of the other channels or write your stories, whatever you do. Don't just leave a record for us. I want to ask you back in Rhodesia. So I was told that Rhodesians, they're actually quite clever people and they had all sorts of things going on. And what they would do is they would put a tracking device or something in an FM radio and they would put this in a farm store. And when the terrorists come and he robs the store and he takes that FM radio with him, they could trace him and they call that a runner or something. Have you heard about that? I read it somewhere. You ever dealt with such things?
Unfortunately not, because we were very focused on monitoring the Zambian frequencies of the military and the police. Interesting about Sunday evenings, then the police were transmitting the soccer results of the day. Then they report on the Kapwe Warriors won Nadala United. And we were following the soccer of the Zambian league. That was also interesting, but we were not involved really with the Rhodesian signalers itself.
I was living in Katima Malelo as a child, and we would listen on the FM radios to Zambia radio, whatever they called themselves. And it was the funniest thing. I don't know if anybody else can recall this, but I'm just quoting from memory now, many years ago, but this jockey or whatever would start the morning by saying, "Good morning, Mr. President," and his wives. And he carries on. It was quite funny listening to these people. Did you ever observe anything from their side, sir, which was funny?
Yeah, it's basically the soccer results from the police radios. That's basically what we listen to.
I was told that this telex machine of yours was actually an encrypted thing, based upon Second World War technology, which was later broken, I think, with Enigma code or something they called it, or Enigma. Is there any truth on that?
I'm not sure if they were able to break our code system. We used a high-powered HF radio with equipment. The transmitter was a Cockelay. That was the name of the thing, but it was encrypted and then put on the teleprinter. So the encryption was taking place elsewhere, and then it was transmitted in that code over the Cockelay, over the HF radio. So I'm not sure if they. Well, it is code breaking is a discipline on its own, very sophisticated and so on. But we had good equipment, I must say, for that 1974. The equipment was of a very high standard, and the antenna systems, and to be able to pick up all the different frequencies and so on. And it was like one operator sits on one frequency for the whole shift. So we were, I remember one time we received, the Zambian army were doing a exercise, and suddenly all the radio traffic erupted on our systems. And all the messages sound like they are preparing to fight. And so we've collected all this information, and the intelligence officer looked at this and he said, here is something going on. And we've sent it to Army HQ, and they've been put on alert for this Zambian possible invasion. But it was only a big exercise, like our sweepslag type of exercises and so on. So that was also something that I remember of listening to the frequencies and so on. You can easily, what happens is that you put the whole layout or the structure of the army together because of the radio interceptions that you do. You can see this battalion is there. If they move a battalion to another place, you can plot them and see if they've moved. Because of the operators that you recognize the voices and also of the direction finding. That was very interesting. At a stage, I participated in an exercise called Brolly 3 that was in Potts area. And we had tactical direction finding, and you could see how the forces move by doing that direction finding. It's amazing when the signals crosses each other and you know that guy is transmitting from that point. It is fascinating to experience that phenomenon of this screen in front of you, and you can see where the guy is transmitting from.
So that's basically where you would have different listening stations and the enemy is transmitting too long, and you can actually calculate where he is.
Exactly, yeah. I cannot remember what was the say 10 meters or 100 meters or whatever the case may be. But the longer he transmit, your chances is much better to plot him. If it's a short transmission, then they are too fast for you. I suppose these days it's different because the machines are much more sophisticated. But those times, short transmissions were a problem. Longer transmissions were what we're looking for. Then you can plot them exactly. And you can plot a call sign and you can see when that call sign is moving.
I was told that when somebody uses a Morse code, when he click with a thing, that you can actually identify him by the way the rate of his clicking going on there. And
Yeah.
you can perhaps not know his name, but you know he's transmitted before.
Yeah, it is called mannerisms. The operators got certain mannerisms, and because of that, making click sounds like that and so on gives a lot of information away. So stay with the procedure, do the exact procedure, because don't give the enemy a chance to plot you and to understand who you are and what's your name. We even knew the operators' names at the stage. Because they were not disciplined enough in doing radio procedures and so on. We've made a little profile of each one.
This is fascinating because, there's a lot of espionage going in the background. And I always look at history because I believe we can learn from history. And, a dreadful thing happened in the Netherlands, Holland, in World War II. We were a special operations executive. I had an uncle there who, their codes were broken. Their ciphers, everything was broken by the Germans, and they took over the Morse codes, and they started. The agent would land and he would be arrested right there and then turn. And some of them were actually sending out the agreed signals that they're under duress, and it was missed. And of course, these people ended up in the concentration camps, and then 2 of them actually escaped. And they warned the Brits that what's going on, that there's games being played, radio games, and they were locked up. They were not believed. They were not believed. So my question to you, sir, with my long background here is, how quickly would they act, or would we act on a tactical intelligence like this? If you can pinpoint a group, a terrorist group somewhere, would you immediately be able to get the fire forces in? Or do you just set it through and let the generals decide what to do?
Yeah, I know that later on, like in the operations that were done in Namibia or Southwest Africa at that time, there were specific vehicles allocated to the different units, and they were very quick to react on that. Unfortunately, I was not involved in that, so I don't actually have information on that. But there was a book written by General Murphy and General Labuschagne on the EW effort of the South African Army and the South African Defence Force. Now, unfortunately, I don't have the name of the book with me at the moment, but I'll try and see if I can get it, because it tells the whole story of EW of that time. So my part was right in the beginning when we were starting the effort.
It still is fascinating the job you were doing, because,
Yeah.
I'm sorry,
There's
interrupted you.
lots of retired signals officers that were involved in, to answer your question, which I will get hold of them and pass it on to you, because it's fascinating how they worked, and the people were very, very, very dedicated, and the development of the equipment is also a very fascinating story. We talk about the development of Ratels and all these vehicles, but the improvement of the tactical equipment, the radio equipment, even the command and control equipment, Eberhout and all those things is just as fascinating, because what happened is they develop a equipment, and then we had to test it, and then we give feedback, and then they improve it, and then they make it available. I remember when I was in Opsavanna, I was in Windhoek when it started there. So I've got hold of the TR-48 radios to replace my B-16 radios. And I think I received like 40 of them. And before I could distribute it to my commando units for radio communications with the commando units, then Savannah started, and they took all my radios again. So I wasn't very impressed with Directorate of Signals giving me radios, and then they take it away, because the TR-48 was a very good radio, a tactical radio, and it's like the TR-15 as well, and later on with the hopping facility as well. Wonderful radios. But the development of signals equipment is just as fascinating as the development of the Ratel and the Rooikat and things. It's different, but it's very fascinating, the way that they developed the equipment and made it available for the fighting forces.
I said to a colonel before we started, I said, I used to know a signals officer. I just can't remember his name. I feel so guilty about it. And the colonel told me that these radios were originally for the Portuguese army. And then the Portuguese, of course, had problems and they had to leave. And when we gratefully took it over, and he also said to me, it's a very, very harsh place to operate a radio is here in Southern Africa. Something about magnetic fields. He became very, very technical. So it's a minor miracle for these things to actually have worked as well as they did. And I really have to congratulate you people. But there is something which bothers me, sir. I have a feeling that the signalers were almost like orphans. You train the man and then he's sent to 3-2 battalion or 3-1 or a BATS or wherever. And it reminds me very much of a medical corps. They trained as medics and then they go and they join another unit. We'll look after them while they are there. or do they find like a little subgroup inside the unit? How did the structure work?
I think the main thing is that they are doing background work, so they're not like in the limelight. But the moment that it's not there, it's like power. When the power is on, everything is fine. Lights are working and everybody is happy. The moment that Eskom stops working, then everybody is up in arms, and then the signals are like that. You know, they provide a service, and it's not seen. It is experienced, but there's no real value on it until it stops, and then suddenly, and because they work in the ops rooms and things like that, they are there and they are always there and doing their job and keep quiet and so on. And the executor, they're not maybe the planners and so on, but they are the support staff. But without them, you've got a big problem. Radio communications for instance, like in 6-1 mechanized battalion, I once went to Army Battle School, and my job was to record all the communications that a battalion was doing. And I had to tape it all and took it to the Directorate of Signals to evaluate and so on. And it was so interesting to me while driving back from Loatla to Army Gymnasium. Then I listened to the tapes, and most of the communications were about where are you, move here, move there. It was positioning the fighting group. Lots of that, about 60% of the radio communications were maneuvering the battle group, and so on. So that was also an eye-opener to me, because you don't actually think about what are they saying on the radios. They are actually maneuvering the force to get in position to be able to fight. And when they fight, then there's the fighting commands. But while going to the objective, they use maneuvering speech, if I can put it that way. And that was very interesting to me to realize that, because that's if you can create chaos at that moment of putting the force into place, if you are jammed, because that's another aspect of electronic warfare, to jam the communications of the enemy. Because if you jam it on a critical phase, then a whole tank group of tanks can stop, because they cannot communicate with each other. They cannot support each other. They cannot get ammunition. They are stuck. So jamming is also a very important part of electronic warfare. I wasn't involved in that, but my people that later on became 5 Signals Regiment was also involved in jamming of frequencies and so on, which is a very powerful way to conduct operations.
Yeah, we have a few Air Force officers who are speaking about that. I think Lieutenant Colonel Vernon Weiss is the electronic warfare expert. And then we have, I'm not sure, the commander of that Spookving, which they were flying around at DC-4, Commandant Atspies. It might be him, it might not be him. I'm sorry, guys. There's so many videos where they talk about their experiences with these things, and we're still trying to get, of course, Colonel Mossie Basson to come and speak to us. Fascinating things which comes out. I spoke to a North Vietnamese officer once. Here, the interesting story. He said to me they were listening in on the American carrier groups during the Vietnam War, which was just winding down over time, which you're speaking about. And they said there would be so much chatter from a group, from a carrier, that they knew when it was the air launch was going to take off to attack them. And then they would be waiting because they could work out the fuel and the distance and all sorts of other things as well with intercepting. It's a game which has been played to this very day. I mean, wherever you find a carrier group or naval vessels, you used to find also these spy trawlers in the Cold
Yeah.
War, and to this very day. Trying to see from a passive viewpoint what's going on. I'm going to ask you, sir, in the future if we can make episodes on passive and active electronic warfare as far as we are allowed to do without, getting into trouble. I know certain things are still on the secret list, especially anything which had to do with this book. We had other people also here, I think of Jacques Detroit, or Jacques Detroit, as my wife calls him in French. He was also on that Jarek. But the army officers really have to come now. You have to come and explain. I want to take you back to Rhodesia, sir. I was told that the Rhodesian women were actually quite attractive. Is there truth in that when you would go to Salisbury or Vic Falls or Kariba Dam, or perhaps seen them lying around there or walking around carrying Uzis?
No, I haven't experienced anything of them, unfortunately, maybe. But I didn't meet anyone like in the female part of the Rhodesian army, because we were very isolated and very secretive where we were. We only had contact with the special branch in Chirundu. Guy there was liaising with us for the local information, because the special branch of the police were contacting us on a weekly basis just to inform us of any movements in the area. But we were very focused on what we were doing, and actually we never actually myself were when I was going to Salisbury, I stayed in the KG6 officers' mess and had lunch and breakfast and so on, but actually meeting only a few people in that. So we were not very involved in the rest of the Rhodesian army because of our secret status at that time.
Can I ask you a last question, sir? It's a bit off topic, but I'm so excited to have you here with us, and I had to pick your brain. It's a fantastic job, I have to say. Marnet radio stelsel, the one which I believe was on the farms in South Africa. I don't know if it was in Namibia and Wambuland as well. Can you just give me a brief what that was about? We will make an episode on it too in the future, I hope.
I think Marnet was a system developed for the rural community. In other words, every farmer belonging to the commandos and so on, it was a commando system specifically developed for that rural, you can say, area covering. And I know that when I was at the OFS Command Signal Unit, we only started with the project at that time. Colonel Dan Nel, he was very involved with Marnet, but there's other people as well. I know one or two officers that worked with Marnet. I will also talk to them, because that is also, it was a very good system for the commando structure. And it was a very good radio, and it was well positioned for the commando way of doing their operations and so on, because they could go everywhere and they had communications. much better as the normal tactical radio type of system, because it was developed specifically for that scenario. And that's why it worked so well. It is like the Ebout and the other systems that they developed as a system, because systems are working. I mean, a human body is a system. A car is a system. Things work if you're working in a system. And Marnet was like that. I was looking forward at that time of getting the Marnet system, because then my communications were sorted out in OFS command, because I was working on a tactical way, but the Marnet system was much better.
Would this work on relay stations, or would they relay between the farms?
Yeah, they were relay stations. It was a system deployed. It's like a static system with mobiles, with mobile radio. So it was not like the conventional type of things that we do with a B-56 and with relay stations like that, or which give you, it was like a walkie-talkie system specifically for the army. Because walkie-talkie, you get a central radio a place that you go through, so you can work a long distance going through the relay stations. And Marnet was very similar to that. That's why I say the equipment story of the Signal Corps is a fascinating story, just like the Ratel one.
Well, we definitely want to record it. I mean, we did the Ratel. I think we covered that well. I spoke to a retired General Piet van Zyl the other day. Wonderful fellow. He was flying with his MiG Mirage 3 reconnaissance once, PZ and EZ, E2Z or something like that. And it seems the equipment they had with him was also, part of his survival equipment was this PLB, this personal location beacon thing, which you can pick him up, shoot the eject, and survive and be on the run. Would that fall under the Signal Corps, sir, or is that totally part of the Air Force, or nothing to do with you guys?
Not that I know of. I think it's more Air Force. There was an organization called Details on SADF level, the Defense Force level, not Army level. So Details were responsible for coordinating the telecommunication effort. And that's why the SATEC was also under Details, coordinating emergency communications and so on. Railways, Eskom, and all those communications, because the Eskom communications ran on the network as well. So that is another story, that the big coordination that we had for emergency situations, that all the state departments work together on coordinating telecommunications and so on. Command and control is also fascinating environment, using the microwave type of technology and so on. All the towers, telecom, all the big. There's a lot of telecommunications that's running all the time, and so the world is like cell phones, and it's just getting bigger and bigger. Like if you look at the conflict now in the Middle East, EW is a big story, big story. The logistics are big time. It's amazing what they can do.
Yeah, it's a different war from ours. I spoke also, the videos are not out yet, of a Navy diver. Was also a ship commander, Dr. Lutando Prinsloo. And he was also on the fast attack craft. And he said to me, Chris, I sometimes had a feeling that the enemy were wise to us, that they knew more than what they ought to have known. Of course, we had that problem with the Commander, what's his name? The one who became a GRU agent.
Yeah, I remember.
Yeah, now a Rear Admiral retired honorably. Gerhard.
Yeah, Gerhard. Yeah.
Yeah. But did you ever had a sixth sense like that, sir, that there's something happening here which ought to be reported to the counterintelligence, perhaps?
Not really. Maybe I was too low level at that time. I had to worry about troops and food, and the operation is running. So you're very narrow-minded, I realize now. We're just looking for an adventure and the experience.
As long as you were focused, sir.
Yeah.
You were focused. Of course, you people were armed. I mean, you would have an R1 rifle or something with you at all times, right?
Yeah. The SAP had mortars and so on to protect their camp, and they did some shooting exercises, and we were in there, like in Afrikaans say, dampkring. We were there, so we took advantage of that protection of the base.
Yeah, they were top guys with policemen in Rhodesia. I spoke to a few of them. Of course, I came much later in 85. And they were still around, and some of them would be wearing on their camouflage units part 2 sign, Police Anti-Terrorist Unit of the Rhodesian days. They also they had strange names for all these bases of theirs. One was the Strafkompanie Berge. I can't remember exactly where that was. I think it wasn't far from where you were, because there's mountains. And according to them, it was boring. They would just sit there on a mountain peak, and they were just listening in with some signalers and basically helping them out. But each had his own little splendid war going, I suppose.
Yeah. Thank you that I could share my back in the day story of a little operation that took place in 1974.
Thank you, sir. We really appreciate it. And as I say, I think we're going to see a lot more of you. To the rest of you guys out there, guys, please come and speak to me. It's not a hard thing to do. Unfortunately, you will have to wait a few months. We sort of booked ahead. But it's really important, guys. It's important that you come and tell your story. We really need to come on record. We don't want people to believe the enemy. We know the truth. And especially you guys in the background. This was to me one of the most fascinating episodes ever. So thank you, sir. God bless.
Thank you very much, and have a good day.
Thank you for watching. Please like, subscribe, and ring the bell to receive notifications.